Dr. Amanda with Straightsmile Solutions, straightsmilesolutions.com. And from time to time, I do a video that's not really about orthodontic biomechanics or orthodontics in general. And today we're going to talk about, it's going to be a piece of advice to future dental student me 20 plus years ago. Advice that I wish people had told me, in terms of making decisions, things I just never really considered in terms of where to go, how much to spend, everything like that. So just want to give you, I'm not trying to dissuade, especially females from going into dental school, not at all, but I just want you to be aware of things that will come up a decade later, and having this in the back of your mind when you make the decision to go to dental school, which dental school to go to specialize, to not specialize, is really going to help you later. So just things to keep in mind. Certainly nobody told me any of this. So obviously you've probably seen advice on Facebook groups, and Facebook groups, of course, didn't even exist when I was applying to dental school. Social media didn't exist, email barely existed, and the internet barely existed, but there definitely was no social media. So I knew very few to no female dentists, let alone female specialists. I knew I could do it. That was the least of my concerns. I was not worried about being able to get in, to be able to succeed. Like, those were the bottom of my issues. I work very hard and I'm very driven. When I say I want to do something, I'm going to do it. So that was a non-issue for me, which is a lot of people's issue. I did know that I wanted to borrow as little money as possible. And at the time, I was dating someone very seriously in another state. We'd gone to college together, thinking about having a life together. And I almost went to dental school in the Midwest. At the very last minute, I got into UCSF, which I'm from California. Originally, I'd kept my residency, even though I was living in another state, and I was able to go for a fraction of the price to a top 5 dental school. So I was like, okay, well, that's that then. So he at the time stayed in the Midwest, and I went to San Francisco, and that was the end of that for obvious reasons. I'm not saying that you can't make that work, but obviously both of you have to be on the same page, and it didn't seem like it was gonna end anytime soon, and that's fine. Whatever's meant to be is meant to be. Ended up meeting my now husband the first day of dental school, and that was that from there. So we have some pretty cute kids as far as I'm concerned. Great kids, not just cute. And pretty happy there. But yeah, things to think about. I mean, obviously borrow as little as possible. Live like a student. When you are a student, live like a student. This is a tip one. The first 5 to 10 years after you finish school and residency. That's where a lot of people get themselves in trouble. It's very difficult, especially after you've been a student for 30 years, and you're graduating at 30 or in your late 20s. And when those student loans hit, oh my goodness, do what you can do to avoid at all costs taking out any loans that are above 3, 4, 5% interest if possible. Otherwise, it's basically like having a credit card. Definitely stay away from private student loans. Certainly, I would take a less desirable dental school that was significantly cheaper if you got merit or significant grants any day over a more expensive school. It really does not, this is a key point, it does not matter where you go to school. Now, that being said, I actually loved my dental school a lot. Did I love my residency? No. You guys know what I think about that, but it was terrible. But I loved UCSF. I have nothing bad to say about that school. They treated us super well. It wasn't hard to me at all. It was challenging, but it wasn't impossible. I don't really think they failed people out. Certainly you want to know a little bit about the culture at the dental school you're going to. I've heard a lot of horror stories, not unlike my own residency, where I've kind of recently made a video about that, but horror stories about the way people are treated in dental school, horror stories about assessing additional fees, horror stories about people getting kicked out for this and that, I think you really want to talk to current students and just kind of see their level of stress. The one thing I liked about UCSF, and they may not do it this way now, but I totally had never thought about asking. I think I just got really lucky, was that they used a system called the RVU system, which was relative value units, and every procedure had a certain value. Obviously, like an endo or a crown prep is going to have more value than a one surface filling, if you get the idea. And there really was no minimum requirements. You could graduate as long as you had enough quote unquote value or credits. So I love that. I knew I was going to not go into certain types of procedures. I mean, obviously you had to do an oral surgery rotation and other pedo rotation. There's things you had to learn. But if you really, really hated a certain procedure, and if you knew you weren't going to general dentistry, you really didn't have to do that. Or I think you had to do one. So I think I did one endo my entire time. Maybe it was two, but it was something very, very minimal, because I was so not interested in that. But I thought that was cool. It definitely took the stress level down. I think also one major thing you need to keep in mind, and this is something that before I even picked dentistry, and it's moving in different directions, but it's not there yet. I didn't realize I'd have complete lack of flexibility to relocate from state to state. I kind of just figured you could pick up and go, and it wouldn't be a problem once you graduated as long as you passed your exams. And it doesn't work that way at all. There's still state dental boards, there's regional dental boards. There are some schools that integrate the dental boards into the curriculum, so you'll graduate with that no matter what, whether it's state or regional. There's some where you have to later hustle and take your boards after school. That was extremely stressful. I mean, I did it. I passed it first time, not a problem. Also took me a good 9 months to prepare for it. I was very organized in terms of preparing for that practical exam, getting the perfect patient. Very, 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 very stressful right after graduation. I certainly would avoid that if possible. I think the whole thing about having external dental boards is kind of BS. I think it should be integrated in the curriculum. If you're passing your clinicals within the school, you shouldn't have to do this. I mean, obviously a written test makes sense to me, 1, 2, 3, like medicine, but physicians are not doing hands-on practical. I mean, they are in the curriculum, but they're not doing like a standardized practical test. I think that's just ridiculous. And the amount of money that you have to spend in order to do these exams, you have to pay the patients, you have to have transportation. I mean, you don't have the money for this. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's money I did not have, that I had to borrow from friends and family in order to be able to even just pass that test. So just, keeping that in mind, just watch out where you decide to go and make sure it's going to be someplace that you can laterally move other places. You don't want to be boxed into a certain state. Even nowadays, you can be boxed into a certain state, but in order to get reciprocity, a lot of times there's restrictions. So for example, some of the states I've wanted to go to, unless you took a regional board, there's a restriction. If you took a state board, you can't do it. If you graduated before 2004, you can't do it. All these states make some really weird rules, and they think it's for protecting people, but a lot of times it's just control, because they're trying to avoid too many dentists moving into a certain state and upsetting the status quo, or they're trying to prevent people from having multiple licenses in multiple states. And there really should just be one national license, as far as I'm concerned. And maybe you just pay a fee to work in a different state, kind of like medicine or nursing and a lot of other professions. But anyways, that's just my 2 cents worth on that. But things to think about. It is very easy to get boxed in and not be able to have the flexibility to relocate. I've encouraged my kids to not at all go into dentistry. I said, you know what, until things change, it's not the profession you want to be in. It is very saturated right now. I mean, and there are definitely parts of the country where it's not. And if you are somebody who you and your spouse are willing to pick up and move someplace more remote, more small town, maybe a little less desirable parts of the country, in air quotes, it might be desirable to you, but maybe not desirable, not a coastal town, not a warm place, you might do very, very, very well. So don't get me wrong. That just was not, I'm very flexible and things like that, but my husband's definitely not. So just something to keep in mind. The more desirable the place you want to move and the more saturated it is, the less money you will make. And of course, higher usually the cost of living. So the less money you will take home, therefore the lower your standard of living. Obviously, eventually you can own multiple practices and then things will change. And that's basically what you have to do. But you can't just be like an employee and do really, really well. Now, there are some DSOs that claim you're making 300, 400, 5,000, 100,000 a year. These are factories. And I've done that before. Don't get me wrong. I've worked at DSO factories. And when I was 30, 31, 32, it was okay. I was pretty decent at it, but all it takes is one rotten manager, one shady manager, There's always somebody rotten that shows up and can make your life a living nightmare at these places. You have zero control. Um, Obviously, specialists have a little more control than a GP. GPs are very disposable, and you're going to feel disposable at these companies. Um, just be careful. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversifying is a great idea, multiple different locations, but then you probably won't get healthcare or benefits. So, but other things to think about, just, thoughts. I mean, think about, when do you want to have kids? If you want to start a family, obviously for females, the desirable time to start a family is well under age 35. The longer you wait, the more expensive and the more challenging and the more risks there are. I have so many friends over 35 that had to do in vitro, just almost all of them, to be honest. Some got lucky, but most did not. It's it's really challenging on your body to go through that. You may not be able to go through the process and still work. Can make you very ill. I know I'm not speaking from personal experience, but I know enough people who've been through it, and financially, I mean, 6 figures easily. It's an incredibly expensive process to go through, and it's going to really wipe out your savings. So definitely starting earlier is a good idea. But once you have kiddos, everything changes. Things we don't think about. I mean, I grew up in a very large family with a lot of siblings. I was the oldest of five. Yeah, I do have 4 youngers. All different ages. And I know kids get sick, but I don't think I realized how that works with school, how that works with daycare, how that works with childcare whenever they get any sniffle. And I think it's even worse now. I mean, before we could pop a Motrin for our kids and still send them, and usually when they get caught, if it was something minor, but nowadays, no way. Anytime your kid is sick, they are not going to childcare, which means one of you is going to have to stay home. And it's going to happen more frequently than you think. We're not talking once or twice a year. We're talking 5 to 10 times a year, at age 2, 3, babies. I mean, there's so many illnesses, from colds to hand, foot, and mouth. A lot of different things they will catch, and they can catch. And it's just a hassle, and I can tell you, if you have your own practice, you might be able to get creative. Obviously, you're going to lose out on money because you're still going to have to pay your staff. If you don't pay your staff and you shut down, your staff's going to quit. So, I mean, every time you're out, it's not just losing your salary. It's also the overhead that you have to pay. 4, 5, 6,000 a day that you're out. I mean, ridiculous amounts of money that are going to go down the tubes every time your kid is sick. You can't keep your kid in a bubble. So, and if you work for a DSO or, once, twice after that, they're going to fire you. I mean, even though they're not supposed to, they will. They'll find a way to fire you if you're taking off for your kids being sick. They will definitely find a way to do it. It will definitely not last. So, I mean, great if you have, parents or family members that can watch your kids. A lot of times, a lot of people say that they will, and then after a month or two, they change their mind. So, and they're not as flexible anymore. And certainly as parents and grandparents get older, and relatives and aunties and stuff, they don't necessarily want to be around sick kids because it's a risk to them, and we definitely went through that with COVID, where it was like, okay, well, no, we're not taking your kids, because we don't want to get sick. So it just changes the whole concept of things in terms of how you can work. And meanwhile, those student loans don't go away. They're relentless, you don't want to get behind on them, but I mean, I don't want to sound like a giant bummer because dentistry is wonderful when everything's lined up, but, things to think about before you even go into it. What do you want your life to be like? And like I told you, I've got one kid that's going to go directly into BSN nursing school when she goes to college, and the son's going to go into engineering, and they'll both be able to make a 6-figure job as soon as they graduate college. And in hindsight, I probably would have done that had I known that, but I didn't know, right? Because we're all kind of chasing the big lucrative careers and thinking that we want to do something big and fancy, but sometimes doing something big and fancy isn't the best thing to do. I don't regret the path that I've taken. I love what I'm doing now with my consulting company, and I really appreciate all of you who do support and continue to support me and my company, and that's why I give back with as much advice as possible to all of you. And I've definitely had some amazing conversations with a lot of female dental students and people considering to apply to dental school. I welcome those conversations. They are free. You are just can just go to my website and schedule. They're up to 20 minutes long. Just listen. I mean, I'm not a trained therapist by any means, but um, I think you should talk stuff out and think about it, before you jump into it. And if all the ducks line up and you've got the full support system that's there, then go for it, definitely. But there's certainly no, you're going to have a lot more flexibility doing something like hygiene and being able to work 2 or 3 days a week, as a W-2. You can usually set your own hours. Hygienists are so in demand. You can demand whatever you want, you know. Um, Sometimes you get lucky as a dentist. I mean, I know we had one that interviewed with one of our offices recently, has young kids, and my husband definitely recognizes that what it's like, and he's giving her the schedule that she wants, which is some pretty funky hours, but that way she can be home every day to be there when the kids come home from school, and have a guaranteed, what she needs. But I mean, he gets that, but there's very, very, very few places where you can be a W-2, have a guaranteed salary, and get out at a certain time. It's just not gonna happen. So, all right, hopefully that helps you. You remember, these kids are only with you for 18 years. I'm certainly experiencing that now with one going into college shortly. Super excited for him. Just stoked for him and everything that he's done. And I feel so blessed that I was able to have this flexibility this last 10 years and really be there to be with him and take him all the places he needed to go, be there for all his sporting events, be a huge part of his life, be home for dinner every day, be home to help them with their homework. I think it really made a massive difference. The first eight, the first 5 to 7 years, my kids were basically raised by nannies and a few family members. And a lot of times I didn't see them for days. By the time I got home, they were asleep and I was up before they got up. And it was like literally like a revolving door. And meanwhile, I'm working, seeing 80, 90, 100 patients a day, commuting an hour and a half each way. And, like, what am I doing this for? This sucks. This is not fun. This is not what I signed up for, really regretting. And there's a lot of dentists that are miserable out there. And I want to let you know that you're not alone. I'm not miserable right now, but I've been there. I've definitely been there. I know a lot of people who are there. And I want to let you know it's okay to be sad and it's okay to pivot, but you need to brainstorm with your family and find a way to pivot. And I have a couple other videos on different non-clinical side hustles for dentists, different ways other dentists can make income from home, decent income. And it's not going to be giant amounts, but it'll start small, but it's something, and it's certainly a heck of a lot more than being a Lyft or an Uber driver. But people need to know who you are, and unless they know who you are and you're engaging with other people, virtually on LinkedIn, Instagram, things like that, people don't know that you have value and knowledge. So definitely the first step is to get that social media up and going and start connecting and posting. All right, thanks so much.